Beyond the classroom, when two English teachers feel an attraction for each other, lesbian passion. I never thought my life as a teacher would change inside those quiet hallways. It started the day Claire walked into the lounge with her confident stride and warm laughter. She wasn't just another colleague. Something about her presence unsettled me in ways I couldn't explain. Our conversations were ordinary at first, but each glance, each shared smile, carried a weight I couldn't ignore. This story is about discovering what happens when friendship begins to blur into something deeper, when two women find themselves drawn together in a way neither expected. It's a journey of attraction, doubt, and courage. Stay with me until the end, because what happens beyond the classroom will surprise you. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single chapter. The first time I noticed Claire, it wasn't because she was trying to stand out. She wasn't loud, nor did she demand attention. She simply carried herself in a way that made you stop and look twice. Her hair was tied up in a loose bun, strands escaping in that effortless way that makes someone look real, not polished. She wore a navy blazer over a plain white blouse, professional yet relaxed. And then there was her smile, genuine, unforced, the kind that made her students lean in and listen. I had been teaching English at Ridgewood High for 3 years. The days had blurred into a rhythm, correcting essays late into the night, arriving with a half-finished coffee in hand, and trying to keep teenagers awake through poetry discussions. I liked my job, but it didn't exactly excite me anymore. Life was routine, safe, predictable. Until Claire walked into the teacher's lounge that September morning. She greeted everyone with warmth, but when her eyes met mine, something flickered. I felt it instantly, a kind of jolt I tried to brush off. Maybe it was just first-day nerves, I told myself. She was new, I was curious. That was all. Except it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, our paths crossed constantly. At first, it was casual, sitting next to each other in staff meetings, exchanging complaints about endless grading, laughing about how the copier always jammed right before class. But those little moments began to linger in my mind. I would catch myself replaying them on my drive home, wondering why the sound of her laugh stayed with me longer than it should. One afternoon, I found myself staying late in my classroom. The sun was low, casting golden light across the rows of empty desks. I heard footsteps in the hall and looked up to see Claire standing in the doorway, holding a stack of ungraded quizzes. "Still here?" she asked, tilting her head with a smile. "Always," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "It feels like the work never ends." She walked in and set her papers on the desk nearest mine. "Tell me about it. I'm starting to think essays multiply at night when we're not looking." I laughed, but my chest tightened when she sat across from me, her elbow resting on the desk, her face so close I could see the faint freckles on her skin. We talked for nearly an hour that day, about books, about why we became teachers, about the kind of impact we wanted to have on our students. Her passion was infectious, and it reminded me of why I had chosen this profession in the first place. But beneath our words, there was something else building. Something neither of us mentioned, but both of us felt. I began to notice everything about her. The way she tapped her pen against the table when she was deep in thought. The way her eyes lit up when she talked about her favorite author. The way she leaned closer when we shared secrets about the chaos of teaching. And then came the small touches. Her hand brushing mine as she passed me a paper. Her shoulder grazing mine as we both reached for the stapler. Each one was brief, almost accidental, yet it left me with a rush of warmth I couldn't ignore. One rainy Friday, we ended up walking out to the parking lot together. The air was damp, and the scent of wet leaves filled the air. Claire pulled her umbrella from her bag and opened it wide. "Come on," she said, motioning for me to join her. I hesitated for a second, but then I stepped under it. Our arms brushed as we walked, the umbrella barely covering us both. The silence between us felt charged, as though the rain itself was waiting for me to say something, to admit what was stirring inside me. But I stayed quiet, afraid of breaking the fragile line between friendship and something else. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smile, felt her arm against mine. It was more than admiration. More than a crush. I knew it now. But what unsettled me most was not the attraction. It was the fear of what it meant. What if she didn't feel the same? What if I misread everything? Still, I couldn't deny it anymore. The turning point came the following week. We were in the lounge again, both grading at the same table. A few teachers had already left for the day, and the building was unusually quiet. Claire leaned back in her chair, stretching with a sigh. I swear, if I read one more essay about Romeo and Juliet being a love story, I might lose it, she said, shaking her head. I chuckled, looking up from my stack of papers. They never see that it's really a tragedy. It's like they're blinded by the romance. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, we didn't look away. Something unspoken passed between us, something that made the air heavier, more intimate. My breath caught, and I had to glance back at my papers to ground myself. But even as I tried to focus, I felt her gaze lingering on me. And that was when I knew this wasn't one-sided. She felt it too. I just didn't know what either of us would do about it. As the clock ticked past 5, Claire closed her notebook and stood. She gathered her things slowly, almost reluctantly. Then she looked at me one more time before leaving, her voice low but steady. "See you tomorrow." It was ordinary, simple. But the way she said it carried a weight that left me frozen in my chair long after she walked out. That night, lying awake in bed, I asked myself the question I had been avoiding. Was I ready to step closer to her, to risk everything we had just to find out what this was? The thought terrified me. But what terrified me more was the idea of doing nothing at all. And so, I made a decision. I would find a way to get closer to Claire, closer than I had ever dared before. What I didn't know was how quickly that choice would change everything. The decision to get closer to Claire lingered in my mind all weekend. I thought about it while folding laundry, while walking through the aisles of the grocery store, while standing in front of my bathroom mirror brushing my teeth. It wasn't a matter of if anymore. It was when. And even though the thought sent a nervous current racing through me, it also gave me a strange sense of clarity. On Monday morning, I found myself arriving at school earlier than usual. The parking lot was still half empty, the autumn air crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. I walked into the building with my coffee in hand, my heart beating a little faster than it should have. When I pushed open the lounge door, I found her there, already sitting at the table with her laptop open, glasses perched on her nose as she typed. "Morning," I said, my voice softer than I intended. She looked up and smiled, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You're early. I could say the same about you." Claire closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. "I like the quiet before the chaos. It's the only time this place feels peaceful." I laughed gently, setting my coffee down across from her. "You're right. Once the bell rings, it's like stepping into another world." We sat there for a while, sipping our coffees, talking about nothing and everything. Our conversations always flowed so easily, as though we'd known each other far longer than a few weeks. And the more she opened up, the more I realized how much I wanted to know about her. Not just her favorite books or teaching strategies, but the parts of her life she didn't share with anyone else. That afternoon, I took a step forward. After classes ended, I knocked lightly on her classroom door. She looked up from her desk, surprised but pleased to see me. "Hey," I said, hovering at the doorway. "I was wondering if you'd like to grab a coffee after school sometime. Off campus, I mean." Her eyes lit up in a way that made my stomach flip. "I'd like that." We agreed to meet later that week at a small cafe downtown. When Thursday came, I spent too long deciding what to wear, changing outfits 3 times before settling on something casual yet careful. I told myself it was just coffee between colleagues, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. The cafe was warm, filled with the scent of roasted beans and soft indie music playing through the speakers. Claire was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window with a book in her hands. She looked up as I walked in, and the way her face brightened made the whole room feel lighter. "Glad you made it," she said, standing slightly as if to greet me properly. "Wouldn't miss it." We ordered drinks and settled into conversation. At first, it was easy, stories about our students, frustrations about the endless grading, jokes about the quirks of the administration. But as the evening stretched on, our words grew more personal. She told me about her childhood in a small town, about the teacher who had inspired her to pursue literature. I shared pieces of myself too, things I didn't usually reveal, like how I sometimes doubted whether I was making a difference in my students' lives. Claire listened intently, her gaze steady and encouraging. "You make more of an impact than you realize," she said softly. "You have this way of making people feel seen. I noticed that about you right away." Her words struck me harder than I expected. My throat tightened, and I had to look down at my cup to gather myself. No one had ever said something like that to me before. By the time we left the cafe, the sky was dark, streetlights casting a soft glow on the wet pavement. We walked side by side to the parking lot, the air filled with unspoken things. When we reached our cars, she hesitated, turning to face me. "I had a really good time tonight," she said, her voice quiet. "Me too," I replied, and I meant it more than I could express. For a moment, it felt like she was about to step closer. My breath caught, my chest pounding. But then she stopped herself, offering a small smile instead. "See you tomorrow." I watched her drive away, my emotions tangled in excitement and confusion. Did she feel what I felt? Or was I imagining it all? The next day at school, things felt different. Our usual banter carried an undercurrent, as though both of us were aware of the shift but neither dared to name it. During lunch, she sat next to me, her knee brushing against mine beneath the table. It was a fleeting contact, but it sent a wave of heat through me. Later that week, the school hosted its annual fall festival. Students and teachers gathered in the gymnasium, decorated with orange and gold streamers. Claire and I worked at the poetry booth, encouraging students to write verses for extra credit. The atmosphere was festive, but I could hardly focus on anything except her presence beside me. At one point, a student asked for help rhyming a line, and Claire leaned close, her shoulder pressing lightly against mine as we looked at the paper together. Her voice was low, her breath brushing my ear as she suggested a word. I froze, every nerve in my body alive, and when she pulled back, her eyes lingered on mine for a second too long. It was then that I realized something. This wasn't just in my head. The tension wasn't one-sided. She felt it too, though neither of us dared to cross the invisible line between us. But later that night, as I replayed the moment in my mind, another thought unsettled me. If this continued, it would no longer be just subtle glances and accidental touches. Sooner or later, something was bound to happen. And I wasn't sure either of us was ready for what that meant. The weeks that followed the fall festival seemed to blur together, but one thing remained sharp in my memory: the feeling of Claire's shoulder pressed against mine, the sound of her voice low in my ear. It was such a small moment, one that no one else would have noticed, yet it stayed with me like an echo. Every time I walked into the teacher's lounge, every time I saw her across the hallway surrounded by students, every time she laughed at something a colleague said, I felt that echo returning. It was as though the world had tilted slightly, and now I could never look at her the same way again. We grew closer, though not in ways anyone else would question. Coffee runs before class, grading sessions at the same table, even sharing lunch when one of us forgot to pack something. To others, it probably looked like a natural friendship between coworkers. But to me, every smile, every touch of her hand against mine when she passed me a paper, every glance that lingered a second too long felt like something more. And yet, she never said anything directly. Neither did I. We were both caught in that delicate space where silence carried as much meaning as words. One Tuesday afternoon, the tension reached a new level. I was in my classroom, gathering papers into neat stacks, when I heard a knock on the doorframe. Claire leaned casually against it, her arms crossed, a mischievous smile on her face. "Busy?" she asked. "Always," I replied, though I smiled back. "But I could use a break." She stepped inside, glancing around at the cluttered desks. "You work too hard." "So do you," I countered, and she laughed softly. She came closer, picking up one of the essays from the pile and skimming it. "Your students write so much. I don't know how you keep up." "Barely," I admitted. "Most nights, I fall asleep on the couch with a red pen still in my hand." Her eyes lifted to mine, and for a second, neither of us moved. The air felt charged again, like it had at the cafe, like it had at the festival. I could hear the faint hum of the heating vents, the shuffle of students in the hallway, but all of it seemed distant. Claire placed the essay back on the desk and leaned a little closer. Maybe you need someone to remind you to take breaks. Her words hung between us, heavier than they should have been. My pulse quickened, and I had to force myself to look away. Maybe, I said, my voice lower than I intended. We stood there in silence for a moment, neither of us willing to break the spell. Then the bell rang, startling us both, and the hallway filled with noise again. Claire stepped back, her expression unreadable. "I'll see you later," she said quickly before slipping out the door. I sank into my chair, my heart racing. It was becoming impossible to pretend anymore. She felt it too, I was sure of it. But why wouldn't she say anything? Why did she always retreat right when it felt like something might happen? That night, I found myself lying awake again, turning it over in my mind. Maybe she was just as scared as I was. Maybe she was afraid of what people would say, of what it would mean to cross that line. The thought gave me both comfort and frustration. The next weekend, fate pushed us closer. The school hosted a charity fundraiser, and both of us volunteered to help set up. By the time the event began, the gym was filled with families, music, and the smell of baked goods from the sale tables. Claire and I worked side by side, handing out raffle tickets and keeping track of donations. At one point, while we were restocking supplies in a storage room, the lights flickered. I glanced up, frowning. Great. Just what we need. Don't worry, Claire said with a smirk. It's this building. The wiring's ancient. But then the power cut out completely, plunging us into darkness. I felt a jolt of panic, but before I could speak, I felt her hand brush mine. You okay? She asked, her voice low. Yeah, I breathed though my chest was tight. Just not a fan of sudden blackouts. Her hand found mine again, this time holding it firmly. It's fine. We'll just wait it out. I stood frozen in that dark room, her fingers wrapped around mine, the world outside muffled and distant. The electricity buzzed back to life a few moments later, the lights flickering on overhead. But neither of us let go right away. When our eyes met, the look on her face nearly unraveled me. She pulled her hand back slowly, clearing her throat. We should get back out there. Yes, I said, though my voice was barely steady. The rest of the night passed in a blur. We laughed with students, congratulated parents on their raffle wins, acted like nothing had happened. But the truth was, something had happened. And we both knew it. As the event wound down and people began to leave, Claire approached me again. Thanks for tonight, she said, her smile softer this time. You were great. You too. For a moment, I thought she was going to say more. She stepped closer, her lips parting slightly, her eyes searching mine. But then a group of parents walked by, breaking the moment. She stepped back, plastering on a polite smile for them. By the time the gym was empty, she was already gone. I stood there, staring at the door she had just walked through, my heart aching with confusion. Why did she keep pulling away? Why did she keep leaving me with half-finished moments, as if we were trapped in some endless almost? That night, as I sat on my couch staring at the dark window, I asked myself the question I had been avoiding. How much longer could I keep pretending this was just friendship? Because the truth was undeniable now, I wanted more. And I needed to know if she did too. The Monday after the fundraiser felt heavier than most. The memory of Claire's hand holding mine in the dark still lingered, haunting me with its simplicity and its intensity. I kept replaying it in my mind, the warmth of her touch, the way her eyes locked with mine when the lights came back on. It had been so real, so undeniable. And yet, just as quickly, she had pulled away again. I told myself to focus on my students, to bury myself in grading and lesson plans, but the truth was, every time I saw her down the hall, my heart ached with questions. Was she afraid? Did she regret what happened? Or was she, like me, holding on to every second of it? The answer came sooner than I expected, but not in the way I had hoped. That week, a storm hit Ridgewood. Heavy rain battered the windows, flooding streets and knocking out power across the town. By Wednesday afternoon, the school board announced early dismissal, and chaos erupted in the hallways as students rushed to leave. Teachers scrambled to manage the situation, and I found myself helping a group of stranded students whose parents couldn't get through the rising waters. Claire was there too, soaked from running outside to direct traffic. Her hair clung to her cheeks, and her blazer was dark with rain. But even drenched, she was radiant. "Buses are delayed," she told me breathlessly, pushing wet strands out of her face. "We have at least 30 kids stuck here until the storm passes." I nodded, my chest tightening at the sight of her. "We'll keep them calm." 4 hours, we worked side by side, turning the cafeteria into a temporary shelter. We handed out snacks from the vending machines, played games to distract the students, and reassured parents over the phone. The storm outside was fierce, thunder rolling like cannon fire, rain slamming against the windows. Yet, in the middle of the chaos, there was a strange comfort in knowing we were in it together. As the night dragged on and most of the students were finally picked up, exhaustion set in. Only a handful of kids remained, lying on blankets with flashlights as we waited for their parents. Claire and I sat together at one of the cafeteria tables, the room dimly lit by emergency lights. "You handled that really well," she said quietly, her eyes soft as they met mine. I shrugged, trying to mask the way my pulse raced. "We make a good team." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Yeah, we do." The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we weren't saying. And then, before I could stop myself, I asked the question that had been burning inside me. "Claire, what are we doing?" She froze, her smile fading. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean," I said, my voice trembling. "The looks, the moments, the way you hold back and then step closer again. I can't keep pretending it's nothing." Her expression shifted, torn between fear and something deeper. "It's not nothing," she admitted in a low tone. "But it's complicated." I leaned in, desperate to understand. "Why?" Before she could answer, the cafeteria door swung open, and the principal walked in, shaking rain from his umbrella. "Good work today," he said, glancing at both of us. "I know it's been a long night. You should head home once the last kids are picked up." Claire straightened instantly, the moment between us shattered. She nodded quickly, her professional mask snapping back into place. "Of course." I felt the sting of disappointment in my chest. She had been about to say something important, something real. But now it was gone, buried beneath duty and appearances. By the time the storm passed and I finally drove home, I was restless with frustration. I knew she felt something, she had admitted it, but what was she so afraid of? Was it the school? The possibility of gossip? Or was it me? The next morning, exhaustion hung over the entire building. Teachers shuffled through the halls with coffee cups, students were half asleep at their desks, and the storm's aftermath left everyone on edge. But for me, the tension wasn't just about the weather. It was about the unfinished conversation with Claire. At lunch, I found her sitting alone in the lounge, staring down at a notebook. I hesitated before walking over, my nerves buzzing. "Hey," I said gently. "About last night?" She looked up sharply, her expression guarded. "Not here." The firmness in her tone startled me. She closed the notebook and stood, brushing past me without another word. My stomach twisted as I watched her leave. The distance she put between us for the rest of the day was unbearable. No more shared smiles, no more subtle touches, just silence where connection used to be. I tried to convince myself it was temporary, that she just needed space. But by the time the final bell rang, my heart was heavy with doubt. That evening, I sat in my car in the empty parking lot, gripping the steering wheel. I could feel the weight of the choice pressing down on me. Either I kept waiting, or I risked everything by pushing her for the truth. I didn't notice Claire walking up until she tapped lightly on my window. Startled, I rolled it down. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice unsteady. I nodded quickly, my pulse skyrocketing. She slipped into the passenger seat, rain dripping from her coat. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air was thick with tension, the hum of the engine filling the silence. Finally, she exhaled shakily. "You're right. We can't keep pretending." My heart leapt, but before I could respond, she added, "The problem is, I don't know if I'm ready for what happens if we stop." Her honesty hit me harder than any rejection. She wasn't denying her feelings, she was afraid of them. Afraid of what they meant, of the risks they carried. I wanted to reach for her hand, to tell her we'd figure it out together. But before I could, headlights swept across the parking lot as another teacher pulled in, breaking the fragile bubble of privacy. Claire flinched, her guard snapping back in place. "I should go," she said quickly, fumbling with the door handle. "Claire, wait," I pleaded, but she was already stepping out into the rain. I sat there watching her walk away, the taste of unfinished words burning on my tongue. And in that moment, one truth settled deep inside me: this wasn't just attraction anymore. It was something bigger, something that could change everything, if only we were brave enough to face it. The days after that night in the car were the hardest. Claire and I moved through the halls like strangers, keeping our distance as if nothing had ever happened. But silence has its own weight, and every glance we tried to avoid only deepened the ache inside me. I told myself to let go, to protect myself from wanting too much. Yet no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't erase her from my thoughts. I replayed every smile, every brush of her hand, every moment we almost crossed that invisible line. I wanted clarity, and more than that, I wanted her. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon. The school was quiet, students already gone for the weekend, the hallways echoing with emptiness. I stayed late to finish grading, but my mind wasn't on the papers. I was thinking about Claire. About the questions left unanswered. When I finally walked out, I found her sitting alone on the steps outside, staring at the fading light. My breath caught, and for a moment I considered turning back. But something inside me refused to run anymore. I stepped closer, my voice soft. "Claire." She looked up, her eyes tired, conflicted. "Hey." I sat beside her, the chill of the evening settling around us. For a long time, we didn't speak. And then, finally, I said the words I had been holding back. "I can't keep pretending this is nothing. Not when it feels like everything." Her shoulders tensed, her eyes glistening. "I know," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I feel it too. But I've been so afraid of what people would say, of losing control, of what it means to want you the way I do." Her honesty unraveled me. I reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. Her fingers tightened around mine, trembling. "We can't keep living in fear," I whispered. "Not when this is real." Tears welled in her eyes, and she let out a shaky laugh. "Do you know how many times I've wanted to tell you that? How many times I almost did?" I smiled through the ache in my chest. "Then say it now." She looked at me for a long moment, as if searching for the courage inside herself. And then, finally, she said it. "I want you." The words hit me like a wave, breaking open everything I had been holding back. I leaned forward, and she met me halfway. Our lips touched, tentative at first, then deeper, fuller, as if we were both pouring weeks of silence and longing into a single moment. The world around us faded, the quiet campus, the cooling air, the risks that still loomed ahead. All that mattered was her. When we pulled back, breathless, she pressed her forehead against mine. "I don't know what happens next," she whispered. "Neither do I admitted. "But I know I don't want to walk away." We sat there as the sun slipped below the horizon, our hands entwined, hearts finally laid bare. For the first time, the uncertainty didn't scare me. It felt like freedom. In the weeks that followed, we learned to navigate carefully. Stolen moments, quiet conversations, a closeness we no longer tried to deny. It wasn't always easy. There were days when doubt returned, when the weight of secrecy pressed hard against us. But every time I looked at her, I knew it was worth it. Because beyond the fear, beyond the risk, there was something undeniable, love, raw and unexpected, blooming where neither of us had thought it could. Looking back now, I realized this wasn't just about falling for Claire. It was about finding the courage to face myself, to accept what I wanted without shame. It was about learning that sometimes the most important lessons don't come from books or classrooms. They come from the people who make us feel alive. So I ask you, listening to my story, how many times have you held back from something real because of fear? How many moments have you let slip away because you weren't ready to take the risk? Love doesn't wait for the perfect moment. It happens in stolen glances, in quiet hallways, in hands reaching for each other when the lights go out. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is to step forward and say yes. If my story moved you, take a moment to reflect on your own. And don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications, because love, in all its unexpected forms, is worth telling and worth living.